Gary Shapiro, and I want to thank the members of my family which are applauding. That's right. I want to start off by welcoming to the session. Probably no other session in CES history has gotten as much pre-show attention as this one, which is very exciting. It was going to be 2 people in series, and Chairman Ajit Pai decided to change his plans. I will say personally, I know Ajit Pai. He's one of the finest people and nicest people I've ever met, and he has faced some horrible situation involving his, this is all those news reported, I don't know how many personal experience, personal threats to his life and his kids and at his home. The guy's a government serving, he's not the President of the United States with a full White House detail and gates around his house. And he's, the net neutrality issue, which we'll talk about in a second, is one which is very nuanced, and there's a lot of complexity there. I know from our perspective as an association, the Consumer Technology Association, we have 2,000 members, and you know, there was an effort there to regulate a lot of them, including car companies, under the law that was out there for a while. So it will go through the courts, but I will give you my assurance, and I don't know if, I should start by introducing, then I'll finish my thought, because it's not about me, as my wife says. I'm actually pleased. Got a lot of
It's partially about you.
This is a great start. I'm pleased to introduce Maureen Olhausen, the acting chairman of the Federal Trade Commission. She was sworn in as a commissioner of the FTC in April of 2012. She's been designated acting FTC chairman by President Trump in January 2017. And acting chairman Olhausen has coined the term, it's my favorite, I love this so much, I used it in my opening this morning, regulatory humility, for which we are very grateful. Actually, I would even take out the regulatory and try to make that, but that's something, again, my wife is very good at working with me on, is my humility. So we very much appreciate you coming to CES. It's been a busy one for the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission has a very broad range of activity, from occupational licensing to privacy, and a few other agencies, if any, have this range. And we're deeply interested in so many areas. But I want to start out with the elephant in the room, because I think that's gotten so much media attention. And to finish the thought was that it's a very, very complex proceeding, number one, in terms of nuance. And number two, under any scenario, Republicans and Democrats agree on the most fundamental basic principles of being able to get what we should get. And I think that no matter what would happen, no matter which way, whichever law survives whatever time, there is the backup of the Federal Trade Commission, there's the backup of Congress, and there's bipartisan agreement on the basic fundamental principles. Having been a person who, I think it was 15 or 20 years ago, worked very hard to get the FTC to adopt those voluntary principles which have carried us so long and so well. So let's start with net neutrality, or maybe use different language to talk about it. Can you talk about the FTC role and how it has changed in the last month, if you will?
Absolutely. And Gary, thank you so much, and to CTA for having me. I'm sorry that Chairman Pai isn't able to join us. I certainly have enjoyed working with him on these issues. So the Federal Trade Commission, we have a dual mission, which is to promote competition and to protect consumers. And net neutrality and some of these issues about consumers getting what is promised to them in their internet service is something we've paid a lot of attention to over the years. So going back to a previous role that I had at the Commission, when I was head of the Office of Policy Planning, I headed up our Internet Access Task Force. And so I've been working on these issues since 2006. And in 2007, we issued a bipartisan, unanimous bipartisan report from the Federal Trade Commission talking about how the FTC, with our consumer protection powers and antitrust powers, can help ensure that consumers have competition, that the promises are met. So fast forward to today. The FTC also has a common carrier exemption in our statute. And when the FCC reclassified broadband as a Title II service, that's a common carrier service, and it divested the FTC of authority. So from the advent of the internet until 2015, the FTC was able to play a role here, and we did. We played an active role in enforcement in this area and policy thinking. So now that the Open Internet Order has been put out, and eventually this authority is going to come back to the FTC. So one of the things that the Open Internet Order has that's really important is this requirement of transparency, that ISPs are going to need to provide information about how they manage traffic. And if they don't meet those promises, then the FTC can bring an enforcement action. So the FTC and the FCC signed a memorandum of understanding just last month to talk about how we're going to divide up these obligations. On the antitrust front, the FTC can also help protect competition in the marketplace. And also the Department of Justice Antitrust Division can play a role in that as well.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. So in Europe, there's like 100 different telecommunications companies, and they have lower cost broadband than we have in the United States, and with varying levels of speed. And you mentioned competition. Here we have essentially 4 telecom companies, and then you could throw in a Comcast, and maybe you get the benefit of some other flavors like Wi-Fi that helps a little bit in choice and internet. Can you comment on the competition role that FTC has? Like, is there anything we can do with the FTC or otherwise to get more competition in broadband?
Well, a couple of things. One thing that I've really seen is the incredible explosion in broadband speed. So when we go back to looking at when the FTC report came out in 2007, the speed then that people considered broadband, today it's the speeds that wireless providers are providing. So as we see broadband be available not just through fixed wired broadband, but wireless has really come in. The introduction of 5G, we're going to see, I think, a lot more availability of broadband, but also as technology becomes better at using the spectrum, the broadband that's available. So one of the things I think we've seen is that technology keeps moving ahead and using the spectrum and the broadband more effectively, but then we're creating new services too, so there's increasing need for it. So when you talk about broadband competition in the US, you need to include all these sources of broadband, useful broadband for consumers. So I think the wireless companies need to be part of that, the wired companies, and there might be new innovations down the road that some of your members are going to provide us and new ways to get broadband.
Well, one of the things we saw this morning at the Ford keynote was a discussion of self-driving cars. And there's a certain reliance there on broadband for them to work in the future by every definition. Is cars communicating with each other using the internet and to avoid a collision? Would that be considered more important in terms of prioritization than perhaps downloading something from Netflix?
I would certainly consider it more important. I also think transmitting health information, real-time health data, can be a very, very important use. You can see all these like health and safety kinds of uses that we certainly would want to have priority for them to be delivered. The FTC did a workshop in 2017 about autonomous and connected cars workshop. And we had NHTSA as part of it because the security and the safety is going to be a very, very important part of moving into this future, as is privacy. So the FTC, we're kind of looking at it from the privacy and the consumer privacy area, but the security and the safety role is very, very important as well.
So I think when most people agree with what you just said about some things are more important than others. And I guess so neutrality is something that most people would probably say I'm in favor of neutrality, but sometimes you can't be neutral. You have to say safety and people's lives are more important than people's entertainment.
Yes.
I'm not trying to back you. I'm just trying to say that's why I guess the message I'm trying to get is that this is a nuanced issue, and to put it in black and white terms as both sides have done, and then to throw threats and violence in the equation is just not the American way, in my view, my humble opinion. And we'll be hearing more about that after CES because we'll be taking a strong position that government people deserve a little more respect when they're trying to do their jobs. It's been a challenging time. So we talking about privacy. It was very interesting at the Ford keynote this morning. There was from the keynote stage, you did a survey of the audience on some of the privacy things. Could you talk about the FTC role in privacy and what's happening there?
The FTC is the nation's privacy protection agency. Between privacy and data security cases, we've brought over 500 cases, including one just yesterday involving connected toys. So this was a settlement, an enforcement action and a settlement we reached with VTech, a connected toy company, where we alleged that they hadn't provided the protections to the data that they said that would be provided, and they also hadn't complied with the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So we brought an enforcement action. We have a robust settlement with them, the steps that they're going to have to take, and we also got a civil penalty of $650,000 that'll be paid to the U.S. Treasury. So that's the kind of case the FTC is very good at investigating and bringing those kind of enforcement actions.
And how about the Internet of Things security, and how do you work with other agencies and focus on privacy in that context?
So the Internet of Things, obviously, some of these connected toys are part of that, right? Everything's getting an internet connection these days, but it's much broader than playthings or even consumer level, things that you might have in your home. So I already mentioned the Connected Cars workshop that we did, and NHTSA was a part of that. We did a workshop we did some stuff with the Food and Drug Administration about health apps, right, and allowing apps to be used, but also for them to know, well, what kind of privacy and security obligations do they have? So we work with FDA. We also work with FDA, something you mentioned this morning, which is the hearing aid, where that was a wonderful development for the people who have those kinds of needs. So we did a workshop in 2017 called Now Hear This. And we had the FDA and other CDC and other parts of the government who work on health issues, and we work together with them to get the consumer issues, the privacy issues, and the availability issues addressed. Because there are a lot of consumer needs out there that technology can help meet.
Thank you, Jim. What the Chairman was referring to is the fact that the status quo was there's 3 or 4 big hearing aid companies that control the market, and you have to get a doctor's prescription to get a hearing aid. And what we were trying to shift to is more of the eyeglass approach, which is you can go by your local drugstore, try them on, and get what's appropriate. And Congress actually passed legislation which allows that. It was bipartisan, signed by the President with support of the administration, and it was pro-competition and should drive down tremendously hearing aid prices for a lot of the people of my generation who listen to too much rock and roll and who can't hear a lot. Anyway, that's the pro-competition approach that I think we as an association, even though it sometimes hurts our members, endorse, is that the more competition, the better in almost everything we do. And I know that, having worked with the FTC for at least 30 years, that's what the FTC's mission in part is. But it's also security, cybersecurity. We got engaged in that. Can you talk about botnets and what's been going on there, and how you balance the benefits of connectivity against the challenges of cyber criminals, and mention the responsibilities of all the different players, from government to industry to consumers?
As we focus on some of these issues, so I think we're all aware of the Murray DDoS attack and the vulnerabilities that we're seeing to take place. It's a shared obligation of industry, of law enforcement, of government, to take the right steps and put the right frameworks in place to help stop these kinds of problems. So the FTC isn't a criminal, we don't have criminal enforcement authority. So if there's a criminal use, we're not the entity that's going to be able to bring enforcement action. But one of the things that we do try to help is with industry, to say, making sure that they are taking the proper precautions so that their technology, their products, aren't misused by these criminals trying to do these kinds of activities. So our cases often look at, are there vulnerabilities, obvious vulnerabilities that the entities should have taken into account. Enforcement is a big obligation at the FTC, but it's not the only way we address consumer issues. So we do a lot of education of business, education of consumers. We do workshops. You already mentioned our work with other parts of the government. So this addressing botnets is going to require efforts from all of these stakeholders to make progress in this area.
And what should industry be doing, and what should consumers be looking for? And also, what's the role you think today of government, and maybe how should it evolve?
So several things that the industry should be doing. Certainly educating themselves about these vulnerabilities and taking the appropriate steps. So if you look at some of the enforcement actions the FTC has brought, we look at different steps in the development and the life cycle of a product. So if you have a product, have you developed it appropriately? Have you run the right tests? And then are you patching it appropriately? We've brought cases against companies that have neglected to patch obvious flaws once they become aware of them. Are you doing updates? And then are you informing consumers in a way that they know how to take steps to protect problems with products that they have already purchased? And also, do consumers understand going forward how long a certain product is going to be supported with these kinds of patches and updates?
So switching gears a little bit to antitrust and the economy, there's been a lot of discussion, especially in Europe, about the big is bad and big American platforms are terrible and let's make them pay billions of dollars. And is big bad? I know that's an argument of antitrust that seems to go in and out of fashion. Almost since the first breakup of the oil companies, like 120 years ago or so. Is big bad?
Antitrust is a very fact-specific inquiry. And you can't say big is bad and small is good across the board. You have to look at how is a company, why is it big? Is it because it's innovating, because it's providing products that consumers want at a good price point? Is it because it's thinking way down the road and kind of getting new products to market that consumers want to use? That's wonderful. That's good for consumers, right? We want that kind of dynamism and innovation. And sometimes companies are big because there are big economies of scale, economies of scope. There's a lot of efficiencies in a big company. But is a company getting big merely because it's buying up its competitors, right? And it's not really competing on the merits. Certainly antitrust has an important role to play in reviewing transactions and mergers, and that's a lot of my work at the FTC is looking at these kinds of mergers. And I've had an active enforcement agenda as the acting chair. We've challenged a number of mergers, some in the technology space. But we look at this to say, is this a way for a company to disrupt, to come in with a new innovative product or a new innovative business model that's going to provide better benefits for consumers? The other thing is also, once a company has gotten a market power, we may look at whether it's using like a distribution chain or vertical restraints in a way that is fencing out competitors in a way that's not competition on the merits. And we have brought enforcement actions in that area as well. And we're always looking for whether companies are colluding, right? So if a company is agreeing with, so even with small competitors, if they're all getting together and saying, we're not going to compete on these terms, or we're going to fix prices, or I take, this area and you get that area, that's a very traditional area of antitrust.
So you have the competition responsibility, but how about if a company is very big and getting a lot of data from its consumers, what are the guardrails so that companies, it's not only the privacy, are they unfairly competing by having all this data and using it in other ways? Whether it's a platform, you can go through all the big American platforms like Amazon and Google and Facebook, they're getting a lot of data, and they're big. And I would throw Apple in there as well, I guess. So there's these huge companies that any other country in the world would love to have. And yet we have our own government, and our government is also obviously not just about protecting companies, it's about protecting consumers and citizens. What are the boundaries there? What's a good way to approach that?
That's an excellent question, and I actually wrote a law review article about this already called Competition, Consumer Protection, and the Right Approach to Privacy. So I think a lot of these concerns that we're seeing about companies being able to aggregate big pots of data are really consumer protection concerns. Consumers are worried that a company is going to be able to use that data in a way that's going to disadvantage that consumer, maybe charge them a higher price or discriminate against them in some way. And that, at heart, is a consumer protection concern, I believe. And so now on an antitrust front, there is this question about, well, will companies be able to use this data in a way that's going to give it an advantage over its competitors? But it really depends on how it's going to get that advantage. Is it going to be getting that advantage by competing on the merits? It's going to be providing new, better, targeted, innovative products to consumers. Well, that's the heart of competition. We want to see that happen. So one of my concerns is sort of blending these two in a way that doesn't, it's not really the right tool to use, because what are you going to do? So say you have a company that's accumulated a lot of data because it's transacted with consumers, willingly with consumers a lot. Are we going to say, well, as an antitrust matter, we're concerned about that, so we're going to force that company to share that consumer data more broadly? Well, that runs very counter to the types of privacy concerns that consumers are expressing, right? So the idea that the solution is, well, consumer data just gets spread out to everybody, even people you haven't chosen to transact with. I don't think that's a sensible solution for the type of problem that we're seeing.
Is there a changing definition or sense of what should be private and what should not be?
There are, I think, some core areas that consumers agree on, which is one of the reasons that I just held in December a workshop on what I call informational injury, and looking at the types of injuries that consumers agree are a substantial injury to them when their information is used or exposed. So financial injury, I think everyone agrees, pretty much, that if your social security number is exposed, your account number, in a way that someone can use that to commit fraud, to take money from you, to have an unauthorized charge or commit identity theft against you, that is a harm, a substantial injury for a consumer. But I wanted to explore what other types of injuries would consumers and society in general agree are a harm to consumers. So in the keynote, they talked about real-time location data. People are uncomfortable about that. Well, one of the reasons they're uncomfortable about that is because that can reveal other things about you, right? Like your health status, right? You're at a chemo clinic, every other week. Someone's going to be able to say, well, they probably have a health problem, or other types of information. So we actually just announced a case like 20 minutes ago of the FTC and the state of Nevada against a company called myx.com. And this is a revenge porn website, and it solicits information from people to intimate photos of people that their exes, want to get revenge against them, and their name, address, their social media information, and puts it up there, and so we allege in our complaint that several types of harm result from that. First of all, they charge people money to take the information down. Second of all, people lost jobs or weren't able to get jobs because this information became, their intimate photos and their personal information were put out there. And there were also safety threats to people. They were getting harassing calls, people were trying to come to their homes and things like that. So those are the kinds of harms beyond financial injury that I think the FTC should be addressing. I was very pleased to be able to bring this case forward. We have a settlement with a strong relief against this defendant. But those are the kinds of harms we need to think more deeply about, and that's why I had that workshop in December, and also be able to quantify them, right? How do we measure what those harms are?
Just so I understand, the case was filed where?
In federal court in Nevada.
In Nevada?
Yes.
And you said something about a settlement or something, this is what
right,
you're seeking?
So we filed the complaint,
yes,
and at the same time filed the settlement.
Oh, so it's resolved?
So it's resolved.
Can you share what the settlement is? Or?
Well, the settlement is you're not allowed to do this anymore. And they got no, unfortunately, the website is operated outside the U.S.
Oh,
so we were able to reach one of the defendants that he is here in the U.S. and he received payments and helped set some of these things up, but the owner of the website is outside the US, so we weren't able to reach that.
That's very interesting. So does that, I have heard, not that type of thing, but more corporate damage reputation in another country with a website, where if you had your products bad opinions, you were paying, you essentially was a shakedown scheme to get the bad opinions taken off the website. So that kind of reputational harm, where you have to pay to get your bad stuff taken down, does the corporations have any right to privacy or right to, it's just too bad, so sad?
Well, I mean, I think corporations are often well placed to take care of their own interests, right? So the FTC, we are looking at, you know, individual consumers who otherwise individually wouldn't be, you know, have the wherewithal to challenge these kind of practices, but they're hurting a large number of consumers. So you really need an entity like the FTC to step in and bring, you know, bring people to justice who are bringing, you know, inflicting this kind of harm on consumers.
It's really interesting because in Europe there's the right to be forgotten, where you have the right to delete factual information about yourself if you ask, and apparently it's a very big difference between what we have here. Is that a step towards the right to be forgotten?
I don't think this is a step towards the right to be forgotten because, you know, factual, well, a couple of things. One is the FTC can only challenge behavior that's in commerce, right? So this is a commercial, you know, website. It's charging people. It's making money off of these intimate images. And I think that's the kind of thing that most people would say, well, there's not a general public right to see, you know, nude pictures of individuals. These aren't public figures. There's not like a celebrity kind of thing. And then secondly, with the right to be forgotten in Europe, you know, we have the First Amendment here, right? But the First Amendment doesn't necessarily protect all commercial speech, right? So I think that if there was, you know, I think myx.com is a very good example of where I don't think that you have a First Amendment right to post pictures without those kinds of pictures without the individual's consent, and then also public contact information.
But what I hear you saying is that if it wasn't for the fact that we're charging people, the FTC couldn't do much. Is that accurate or not?
Well, I mean, it has to be in commerce, right? So we have authority over unfair or deceptive acts or practices affecting commerce.
But if they're selling advertising on the website,
if
that
they're
would
selling
be
advertising, that could be in commerce. But if, say, you had, you know, there was a dispute between, you know, two people who used to be dating, and one person sent pictures to some other friend or something, that's not something the FTC could step into.
Well, thank you for breaking news here.
So look at the FTC website, myx.com. Step 10.
Look at the FTC website.
Do not go to that guy. I won't say anything about that website.
So the
just saying, look at the FTC.
To switch subjects,
Yes, please.
it's coming to see innovation, and the 4,000 companies are here firsthand, which makes such a difference to give you a sense of the vibrancy of where we're going as a free market. So please join me in thanking Chairman Allhausen.